On the 15th of August 2009, Kuwait witnessed one of its most horrific domestic disasters, a fire in a women and children tent at a wedding celebration, which killed at least 57 people and injured around 90. The tragedy was not only a fire safety failure, but also laced with deep human emotions of jealousy, anger and revenge, framed in this case by the accused is Nasra Yusuf Muhammad al-Inezi, then aged 23, allegedly motivated by jealousy and revenge after her husband, Zayed Zafiri, took a second wife. In Islamic ethical terms, it also raises questions of how uncontrolled anger and envy can lead to catastrophe, and how Islamic teaching would counsel restraint, patience, and self-control. We will examine firstly the circumstances leading to the fire, then the fire itself, and finally what followed in terms of legal, social, and moral consequences. And throughout, we will reflect on the Islamic perspective on jealousy, anger, and the moral imperative to restrain destructive emotions. The story begins with Nasra Yusuf Muhammad al-Inezi. At the time of the incident, she was 23 years old and married to Zayed Zafiri. The couple had 2 children together, reportedly both with disabilities. The husband, Zafiri, legally, under Kuwaiti law, took a second wife, a permitted arrangement in Muslim law, though socially and emotionally complex. According to official records, Nasra felt deeply aggrieved by this development. She reportedly viewed the second marriage as a profound blow to her dignity and to her marital position. She initially confessed to police that she purchased petrol, took a taxi to the wedding tent, and deliberately set the fire in revenge for the second marriage and for what she viewed as ill treatment by her husband's family. She allegedly only planned to disrupt the wedding and didn't plan to end the lives of so many. She had no idea that giving in to her anger and emotions would lead to such a catastrophic event. Setting aside the question of guilt or innocence, which came before the courts, from a human psychological viewpoint we see a convergence of major emotional triggers, feelings of being replaced, humiliation, loss of status, and jealousy. In Islamic moral theology, jealousy, hasad, and uncontrolled anger, ghadab, represent serious threats to the heart's well-being. For example, the Quran states, "Those who restrain anger and pardon men, verily Allah loves the good doers," Quran chapter 3 verse 134, and those who avoid the greater sins and immoralities, and when they are angry, they forgive, Quran chapter 42 verse 37. Thus, Islamic teaching emphasizes not simply the avoidance of sin, but the transformation of painful emotions into patience and self-mastery. In Nasra's case, the emotional pain appears to have escalated into thoughts of vengeance. Some reports suggest her children's disabilities added to her sense of vulnerability and marginalization, though such factors do not excuse what happened. There were also structural safety failings in the setting of the wedding celebration. For example, the women's tent was packed, had only one exit, and was constructed of highly flammable materials. The local culture of gender-segregated wedding celebrations meant the women's tent was separate. In the Islamic ethical framework, jealousy may itself become a poison. The heart that allows envy to dominate loses clarity. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that true strength is not the ability to overpower others physically, but the self-control to manage one's anger. He stated that the strong person is the one who can control themselves when angry, and that this is more difficult than overpowering others. Thus, even if jealousy or hurt is felt, the response must be one of measured patience, not explosive revenge. On the evening of 15th of August 2009, the marriage celebration took place in Al-Jara. Separate tents were erected, a men's tent for the groom and male guests, and a women and children tent for the bride's side or women guests. On the night of the wedding, the women's tent was reportedly hosting up to 180 to 200 people. According to initial reports, around 9 p.m, a fire broke out. The blaze moved extremely fast. Within 3 minutes, the entire tent was engulfed. The cause, according to the prosecution account, Nasra poured petrol around or on the floor of the women's tent, then ignited it. A maid witness claimed to have seen her carrying a bottle of fuel toward the tent. The tent had only one exit, and the walls and carpets were highly flammable with waxed fabric and carpets. Once the ignition occurred, fire and heat built up very rapidly. According to one forensic note, the temperature inside might have exceeded 500 degrees Celsius. With only one exit, panic ensued. Women and children rushed to escape. Many were overcome by smoke, heat, or blocked paths. Some victims' bodies were charred beyond recognition. Rescue efforts were hampered by the rapid spread. Ultimately, 57 people lost their lives and approximately 90 were injured. The victims were mostly women and children, including stateless Arabs and Saudis as well as Kuwaitis. Identification was difficult. Many bodies required DNA or dental records. The event was described as the worst civilian disaster in Kuwait's history for decades. Here, one sees how uncontrolled emotion of jealousy, desire for revenge combined with structural negligence with one exit and flammable materials, can produce catastrophic consequences. From an Islamic viewpoint, the act of deliberately endangering or harming innocents is gravely sinful. Following the fire, Nasra was arrested on 16 August 2009, the day after the fire, and initially confessed to setting it in revenge for her husband's second marriage. She later retracted parts of her confession, claimed to have been coerced, and said she was at home when the fire broke out. In March 2010, a Kuwaiti court found her guilty of premeditated murder and starting a fire with intent to kill, and handed the death sentence. The conviction was later upheld by the Courts of Appeal and the Court of Cassation. She became the first Kuwaiti woman whose death sentence was affirmed by the Supreme Court. Reports indicate she was executed by hanging on 25 January 2017. The tragedy stirred national grief in Kuwait. The Emir ordered compensation to victims' families and a reduction of public festivities as a mark of respect. Public debate also centered on polygamy and family relations. Some commentators suggested that the emotional distress of the first wife, with disabled children, and the arrival of a second wife contributed to the breakdown. From an Islamic perspective, while polygamy is permitted, it comes with strict obligations of justice and wise use of emotional intelligence. Failing that, as in this case, it can lead to discord. Islamic teaching emphasizes that anger and jealousy, if unchecked, can lead to sins that damage the individual and society. As the Quran states, those who suppress their anger and forgive others, verily, Allah loves the doers of good. Quran chapter 3 verse 134. Jealousy, hasad, likewise is condemned, since it seeks another's blessing to be removed, and from the evil of the envier when he envies. Quran chapter 113 verse 5. Hence the heart that allows envy to fester may lead to destructive action. In the light of this, Nasra's act can be seen as the tragic result of untreated emotional torment, compounded by a decision to act destructively rather than seek counsel, forgiveness or patience. Islam would urge one to turn inward, reflect, seek Allah's help, practice patience, and perhaps forgive what one cannot redress. If at the moment of deep pain, Nasra, or anyone in a similar position, had paused, sought refuge in Allah, recognized her emotional wound and chosen patience rather than revenge, the catastrophe might have been averted. The physical destruction of the tent parallels the spiritual destruction of the heart that allowed revenge to dominate. Thus, the tragedy serves as a profound moral warning. Emotional wounds do not legitimize violence. The path of restraint is morally superior and spiritually rewarded. The 2009 Kuwait wedding tent fire is a tragic intersection of personal anguish, structural negligence, and catastrophic choice. A woman, feeling wronged by her husband's second marriage, allowed jealousy and revenge to drive her to an act that killed dozens of innocent women and children. The event shocked Kuwait, triggered intense legal action, and forced reflection on both event safety and family dynamics. Yet beyond the legal and social dimensions lies a deeper spiritual lesson. Islamic teaching emphasizes that feelings of jealousy and anger are natural, but the test lies in how one responds. The Quran and the Sunnah repeatedly urge the believer to control anger, forgive others, restrain impulse, and seek the pleasure of Allah rather than immediate retaliation. In doing so, one attains not only moral dignity but spiritual peace. Thus, for all who reflect on this event, the horror lies not only in the physical fire, but in the way the fire of emotion went uncontrolled. To prevent such tragedies, we must heed the deeper message: control your anger, redirect your jealousy, and choose patience and compassion instead of vengeance and destruction. In doing so, we honour the memory of the victims and uphold the higher moral calling of the faith.